Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. There was something about the way she held his hand, and something about her soft gaze and faint smile, that contained indescribable splendor. Somehow, it was very attractive. It seemed like actual hooks dragging him toward her. After returning to his own private chamber, he couldn't stop thinking about one particular question. Did something really go wrong with her breakthrough, giving Ghost Mother a chance to make a move? Or, did Gongsun want her do it all on purpose? Although there was no way for him to answer the question, the latter seemed a highly likely possibility. Since there was no way to determine the answer, he stopped thinking about it. Waving his hand to produce a large amount of souls, he once again began to work on 23-colored flame. In all of the eternal immortal domains, and even beyond it, 23-colored flame had never existed. Bai Xiaochun had traveled farther along the path of the heavenly necromancer than anyone in history, all thanks to the genius of Bai Hao. This time, it took him many years to shape the formula for 23-colored flame. And yet, even after all that time, and all of the augury, he still wasn't confident enough to actually try to conjure the flame. It was made worse by the fact that he had so few souls to work with. Most of them he had acquired from the treasured fan, and based on his calculations, he only had enough for 4 attempts. If he failed 4 times in a row, he wouldn't have enough souls to continue his work. The upside was that after the founding of the Arch-Emperor dynasty, some mysterious natural law had come into play which caused the territory they controlled to begin to transform in a way that resembled the Heavenspan realm. Souls had begun to appear out in the open, prompting Bai Xiaochun to issue a dharmic decree for spirit enhancers to work as hard as possible to collect them. After enough time passed, enough souls were collected to allow one more attempt at conjuring the flame. Only 5 chances, he thought. He looked at the souls, and then reviewed his new formula. Finally, his eyes shone with determination, and he made his first attempt at the conjuring. As the souls converged and began to show signs of forming into a multicolored flame, Bai Xiaochun's complete attention was focused on the task at hand. 7 days later, his expression flickered, and he quickly performed a double-handed incantation gesture. Using the power of his cultivation base, he forcibly suppressed the power of the explosion that had just resulted when the flame destabilized. A muffled boom could be heard as he watched the chaotic flame slowly fading away. Afterwards, he sat there, clearly frustrated, his eyes bloodshot, his mind racing as he analyzed the process to determine what had gone wrong. He spent several months on auguries and analysis. Skipping sleep and other daily tasks, he focused with mad intensity as he tried to solve all previous problems. At that point, he began his second attempt. Unfortunately, it was also a failure. It was the same with his third and fourth attempts. Each time, he spent longer and longer trying to perfect his formula and solve all the problems. By the time he was ready for his 5th attempt, 3 years had gone by. Dabao and Xiaoxiao were as naughty as ever, and the Arch-Emperor dynasty continued to grow and flourish. Furthermore, the war champion king finally broke through to become a celestial. The Arch-Emperor dynasty now had 4 celestials. Yet again, the dynasty grew stronger and more powerful. That was when Bai Xiaochun began his 5th attempt. If he failed, then he would have no more souls, and who knew how long it would be before he could collect enough for another try. On this 5th attempt, he was 70% certain that he would succeed in creating a 23-colored flame. After working with careful and complete precision, another color appeared in the chaotic flame in front of him. As it resolved into a 23rd color, an indescribable aura surged out from Bai Xiaochun's private chamber. Not even the spell formation protecting his private chamber was powerful enough to contain that aura. In fact, it even burst through the Imperial Palace's spell formation, as well as the one covering the city itself. As the aura surged, the sky went dim, and the clouds churned. Multicolored light filled the air, until a majestic sea of fire was present, filled with 23 different colors. It immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the area, especially the cultivators from the Heavenspan realm. They were profoundly shaken, a sensation that came from their very blood. How many colors is that? Heavens! That's a 23-colored flame. Cries of astonishment filled Arch-Emperor City, and soon, the laughter of Bai Xiaochun joined them. His face was lit with excitement as he looked at the tongue of 23-colored flame flickering in his palm. It was literally impossible for him to stay calm, as he had sensed that, as soon as the 23-colored flame came into existence, the mark on the back of his hand that represented Bai Hao shivered. This 23-colored flame would be of immense help to Bai Hao. Following instinct alone, Bai Xiaochun tried to still his trembling as he sent the 23-colored flame into Bai Hao's mark. As the two merged together, the mark vibrated with increasing intensity. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was feeling very nervous. The idea of using multicolored flame to resurrect Bai Hao was only something he had come up with by means of speculation. He had no way to know for sure if his idea would work. But now, from the fluctuations he sensed coming from the mark, he had an intense premonition. If I can send 30-colored flame into Hao's mark, then he can definitely be resurrected. Merely thinking back to how Bai Hao had passed away caused his heart to twinge with pain. Bai Hao was the only apprentice he had ever taken in his entire life. After the 23-colored flame fully merged into the mark on his hand, Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with determination. Before, he had possessed no evidence to confirm that he could use flame conjuring techniques to resurrect Bai Hao. But as of this moment, he had a new path laid out in front of him. I need more souls, he said, a solemn expression overtaking his face. His stockpile of souls had run out, and the treasured fan had no more souls in it. However, there was a place that had what was surely an endless supply of souls. He looked up into the sky, which from this perspective looked like a starry sky, but which was actually a vast void. That dark void is filled with countless ruins and unending rubble. It also has endless souls of the deceased. In the years since he had founded his own nation, he had only gone back to the fan a few times to check on Song Ke. Now that he knew how to resurrect Bai Hao, he made a new decision. I'll use the fan to travel through the void, conjuring flame and collecting souls. Once I make that 30-colored flame, I'll resurrect Hao. Having reached the conclusion that this was definitely the best idea, he sent his divine sense to check on Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo, Dabao, and Xiaoxiao. Although he would be traveling a great distance away from them, he could return to the Arch-Emperor dynasty at any time by means of teleportation. However, just to be safe, he decided to leave some divine sense behind in the form of a clone, ready to take action at a moment's notice if necessary. He didn't tell his family of his plan. He simply touched his forehead, causing a clone to step out from him, which sat down cross-legged and began to meditate. Without any further hesitation, he vanished, to reappear in the darkness of the void, on the treasured fan. He was about to embark on a journey through the void, to collect souls. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. Soft light surrounded the fan as it shot through the inky darkness. As it passed along, a glowing trail spread out behind it, making it look almost like a shooting star. Bai Xiaochun sat cross-legged on the sovereign's arm, within the face of the fan. Occasionally, he would open his eyes and look out into the void, his eyes sparkling. It almost seemed like black was the only color out here. However, during the 10 years he had spent traversing the void, he had occasionally encountered ruins or rubble, and collected a good number of souls. Although he was anxious to accomplish his goal, there was nothing else he could do to make things go faster. Furthermore, the fan was clearly following a specific course. Although he could change its speed, and could temporarily make it move in another direction, it would always return to its previous course eventually. Considering he didn't have any specific destination in mind, he finally gave up adjusting the direction, and allowed it to fly along as it wished. As it did, he sat there cross-legged, meditating, and working on the formula for 25-colored flame. Bai Xiaochi fawned over him the entire time, until Bai Xiaochun finally began to consider letting him change his name. Bai Xiaochi was excited about that. Furthermore, he had gotten used to flattering Bai Xiaochun, to the point where it was almost an instinct now. At the moment, he was standing behind Bai Xiaochun, massaging his shoulders and occasionally checking his facial expression. Am I pushing too hard, my lord? I researched some new massage techniques recently that I want to try out. Bai Xiaochi was very pleased with the level of ingratiating. When he was in a good mood, he would reward Bai Xiaochi with a smile, which would get the little spirit automaton excited for an entire day. At the moment, it was only possible to summon one Archean slave. But now, the Archean slave's range wasn't limited to the world of the fan face. He could now leave that world to stand on the surface of the fan. Although he couldn't leave the fan, it did make him much more capable of defending it. If the Vile Emperor somehow managed to find them now, it wouldn't be as much of a big deal. As for dealing with any threatening forces they encountered, the fan had plenty of defenses of its own, all of them quite formidable. In fact, during the past 10 years, it had struck ruins or rubble on more than one occasion. And thus, Bai Xiaochun's journey through the void continued. Another 3 years passed. He was now almost done with his research into 25-colored flame. Considering the number of souls he had collected, he was able to perform 2 tests, both of which failed. One day as he sat there cross-legged in meditation, a tremor passed through him. Usually, he spent his time with his divine sense spread out to detect objects around him in the void. Right now, his eyes opened, and they shone brightly as he hurried to the edge of the fan to look out into the darkness. Bai Xiaochun noticed what was happening, and materialized next to him, where he also looked out excitedly into the void. There, far off in the distance, was a dot of white light. As it got closer, it was obvious that it was a huge lamp. It was fully 3,000 meters in height, and seemed to just be floating along through the void. At a certain point, Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide as he realized that the lamp was being followed by innumerable souls. From what he could tell, there must be hundreds upon hundreds of millions of them. All of them were completely expressionless, and seemed to pulse with an aura of death. It was truly a shocking sight to behold. After all the years spent traveling through the void, this was Bai Xiaochun's first time seeing anything like this. Excited, he caused the fan to slow down. So many souls, he exclaimed, licking his lips. In all of his years searching for souls, this was definitely the largest number yet. Have you ever seen anything like this, Bai Xiaochun? He asked. Although Bai Xiaochun still didn't like his name, he was so shaken by what he was seeing that he immediately shook his head and said, although I spent a lot of my time asleep, my lord, I did spend many, many years awake. And I never saw anything like this. Those souls, heavens, where are they all heading? Bai Xiaochun looked on with narrowed eyes. It was a strange situation, and he didn't want to do anything too rash. It was even stranger considering that the souls didn't seem to have noticed the fan. Carefully issuing another order to the fan, he sent it follow the souls, hoping to figure out where they were going. He followed them for several years. On numerous occasions, the fan would attempt to return to its primary trajectory, until Bai Xiaochun finally ran out of patience and started using soul convergence pill to slowly pilfer the souls. The dark concoctors had been making soul convergence pills day and night, so he had plenty at his disposal. Eventually, he managed to get his hands on all of the hundreds upon hundreds of millions of souls. With that many souls, it only took a few more tests to succeed with 25 colored flame, whereupon he continued on to research 26 colored flame. Although he was tempted to just let the fan go back to its original course, he was still curious about this lamp's final destination. For all he knew, there might be even more souls there. A few months later, that final destination approached. When Bai Xiaochun saw what it was, his mind began to spin. Right there within the void, in front of the lamp, was an enormous well. It was fully 30,000 meters across, and pulsed with an undulating mist that filled the area. As for the lamp, it flew directly into the well. Even more shocking was the fact that he could clearly see other lamps approaching from random directions, more than 10 of them. And each one entered the well. So many souls, he exclaimed excitedly. However, it was such a strange scene that he hesitated about whether or not to try to capture the souls. Heavens! What is this place? Bai Xiaochun exclaimed, clearly stunned, and having not a clue about what he was looking at. Bai Xiaochun waited there, torn about what to do. However, as he watched the lamps simply disappearing into the well, he couldn't take it any longer. This mysterious well is probably dangerous, he said through gritted teeth, but this place is too good to pass up. I'll just wait here for a lamp to come along. Only one. As long as I don't get close to the well, I should be fine. He couldn't let this opportunity slip by, especially considering how many souls he needed to continue his work with 26 colored flame. Eyes flickering with madness, he sat down to wait. Half a month later, he saw another lamp lazily floating toward the well. Eyes glittering, he sent the fan over to it and then flew out and began to toss out masses of soul convergence pill. Booms could be heard as the souls were quickly taken away by Bai Xiaochun. I'm rich, he exclaimed. Hurrying back onto the fan, he sat down nervously to see if anything would happen. A few days later, his courage began to build. Ha ha ha, nothing happened after all. This place is a blessed land for Bai Xiaochun. Eyes shining, he decided to wait for another lamp to show up. A few days later, it came. And thus, Bai Xiaochun madly began to collect souls, completely clearing out any of the lamps which approached. However, Bai Xiaochun already had a very bad feeling about what was going on, and frequently warned Bai Xiaochun about what he was doing. You should quit while you're ahead, my lord. I have a bad feeling about this. Waving his hand nonchalantly, he said, don't you worry. I have a lot of experience with this kind of thing. Filled with excitement at the thought of getting so many souls, he sat down to wait. At first, the lamps would come every few days. But a few months later, the frequency dropped to one every few weeks. Eventually, 4 months passed in which no lamps came, much to his disappointment. Furthermore, the well itself was beginning to flicker oddly, as though it might vanish at any moment. From the look of it, it would be gone within a month. Not willing to give up, Bai Xiaochun finally fixed his gaze on the well itself. This thing is so mysterious. I wonder what it is. And I wonder when I'll encounter something like it again. He was truly torn between his desire to collect souls and his fear of the potential danger. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that, considering he had been here for so long without seeing anything dangerous, he might as well go a bit further. With that, he sent the fan closer to the well and activated the fan's ability to consume other things. If I could suck that well into the fan, that would be perfect. Bai Xiaochun yelped an objection, but did nothing to interfere. And thus, the fan slammed directly into the well. Oddly, there were no intense rumbling sounds as Bai Xiaochun and Bai Xiaoqi had expected. It was almost as if the well existed in a different dimension, or was transparent. The fan passed right through it. Bai Xiaochun gasped in shock. This was his first time encountering a situation that the fan wasn't capable of handling. After passing through the well, Bai Xiaochun looked back at it, and hesitated for a very long moment about what to do. He could give up, but at the same time, couldn't stop thinking about all of the souls that possibly existed within that well. Finally, he decided to throw caution to the wind. Just taking a quick look inside shouldn't be a problem. Gritting his teeth, he sent the fan toward the entrance of the well itself. Upon nearing, he unleashed the power of his cultivation base, and sent some divine sense out. However, the well seemed isolated from his divine sense, making it impossible to see what was inside. He could only approach physically. Nothing about the situation seemed dangerous, and although that caused him to sigh with relief, he didn't let his guard down. Heart-pounding, he looked down into the well itself. What he saw caused his eyes to go wide. It was a completely different world. It was as if the entrance to the well were the sky of that world. Even more shocking, the entire world seemed to be made from paper. Lands, mountains, rivers, buildings, everything was paper. Visible on the surface of all that paper were countless souls, the quantity of which defied anything Bai Xiaochun could have imagined. The world seemed very orderly. The souls were strictly ranked by level, and included the souls of devas, demigods, and celestials. There was even a group of paper people clustered around an Archean soul. It all seemed completely unbelievable. However, it was at that point that, out of the blue, Bai Xiaoqi shouted, "Behind you, my lord." Before Bai Xiaoqi could even finish speaking, a withered hand stretched out of thin air behind Bai Xiaochun, and pushed him. It wasn't moving particularly fast, but Bai Xiaochun didn't even have the time to look over his shoulder, or react in any other way. And any resistance was useless. Massive force slammed into him, provoking a shriek of surprise as he was shoved directly into the well. At the same time, a figure became visible, a stooped old woman who held a lamp in her hand. As Bai Xiaochun fell inside the well, she stood on its edge, looking back at the fan behind her. When Bai Xiaoqi found himself the subject of her gaze, all his hair stood on end, and he sent all of the fan's defenses into high gear, including the aura of the sovereign's arm. Two clouded eyes existed within the old woman's wrinkled face, and they flickered with mysterious light. Suddenly, she smiled, a vicious smile filled with yellowed teeth. Then, she turned and vanished. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun screamed as he fell down into the paper world below. Eventually, he got control of his momentum, and slowed to a halt. As he hovered there, he looked around, and then back up into the sky, which was when he saw 9 faces. All of the faces resembled old women, their features identical, their eyes closed, but their mouths open. From what Bai Xiaochun could tell, he had fallen out of one of those mouths. The well was actually one of their mouths? Who pushed me? An old woman? What level of cultivation base does she have? Taking a deep breath, he prepared to think of a way to leave, but before he could, something happened. His body began to turn into paper. In fact, his hands were already completely paper. His mind began to spin at the realization that this was the deadliest situation he had been in since the founding of the new Arch-Emperor dynasty. Even his fight with the vile emperor had been within the bounds of his own control, but this was different. There was no time for thought or planning. He immediately unleashed the full power of his cultivation base, as well as the powers of regeneration from his undying codex. However, although they could slow the process, they couldn't stop it. It was as if the natural laws within the world itself demanded that all living things who entered it become paper. Damn it, Bai Xiaochun cursed, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't have the slightest desire to be a paper person with glowing red eyes, and therefore, he howled and tried to escape the world. Unfortunately, that was when all of the other paper people in the world suddenly looked up at the now stunned Bai Xiaochun. The souls attached to them all had cold, sinister auras as they howled and began to charge in his direction. In the blink of an eye, they were closing in, unleashing countless divine abilities and magical techniques. The magics took the form of bits of paper, each of which thrummed with the power of the natural laws in this world. Unfortunately, not even Bai Xiaochun's undying codex was able to do much to protect him. By this point, his entire arm was now paper. Complete and utter bullying, he shouted. To his frustration, none of his own divine abilities seemed effective at all, not even the Sutra of Future Paramita. Gritting his teeth, he used his non-paper arm to grab a handful of soul convergence pills, which he threw out behind him. As they exploded, they sucked in the nearby souls, which seemed to deprive the paper people of their life force, causing them to simply float down to the ground. If he weren't being turned into paper, he might have been satisfied with that, and even viewed this place as a holy land. But he was too anxious to be pleased. Tossing out soul convergence pills left and right, and collecting the soul spheres they formed, he shot toward the mouths of the old women, high in the sky. Unfortunately, there were just too many paper people. One was a group powered by celestial souls, led by an Archean soul. As they closed in, Bai Xiaochun was gripped with a sensation of deadly crisis, and immediately tried to reach out to the treasured fan. Although he could barely make contact, it was at least enough to summon a beam of Archean luminescence. Bai Xiaochun had never been in a situation like this before, and it was terrifying. Furthermore, it was the first time out in the void that he had ever felt that he was truly in danger. The paper people alone weren't very worrisome. They were tough to deal with, but he was confident that he could crush them in the end. Even though divine abilities didn't work on them, his soul convergence pills gave him enough of an edge to defeat them. But the bizarre nature of the world itself felt like a sharp blade hanging over his head. If things kept going the way they were, it seemed like he might end up as a paper person himself. Even worse than all that were the faces of the old women in the sky, and the mysterious entity who had pushed him into this world to begin with. All of it made his scalp tingle with fear. Right now, there was only one thing he wanted: to get out of his place as quickly as possible. Therefore, he reached out to the fan and summoned 10 shots of Archean luminescence, all at one time. Out in the void, the fan shone with dazzling light as 10 beams of light shot into the rapidly fading well. Rumbling sounds filled the world as the Archean luminescence descended, which was equivalent to an Archean expert attacking 10 times in a row. In fact, it was such a powerful force that it ripped open a hole in the sky. In response, all of the paper people, as well as the souls, let out piercing howls. And yet, almost as soon as it opened up, the hole began to close. Clearly, the damage would be repaired in a very short time. Not willing to let the opportunity slip away, Bai Xiaochun drew upon the full power of his cultivation base to speed toward the opening, using soul convergence pills to carve a path through the paper people and the souls that got in his way. Thanks to his incredible speed, he was soon right in front of the hole. As the aura of the outside void entered the paper world through the hole, he was once again able to utilize his divine abilities, and resorted to the undying hex and his mountain-shaking bash to get another burst of speed. He looked exactly like a shooting star as he shot out of the hole in the final moment before it closed. By that point, 30% of his body had already turned into paper. Thankfully, after reaching the void, his undying codex began to repair the damage. Before he could breathe a sigh of relief, he heard a coughing sound behind him, followed by muffled howls. Bai Xiaochun's hair immediately stood on end as he realized that the cough must have come from the same person who had shoved him into the well. He immediately began to flee, and even as he did, a huge hand reached out toward him, so withered that it looked like it must belong to a corpse. Bai Xiaochun's heart began to pound wildly. Although the hand didn't give him the sensation that it belonged to a sovereign, it seemed like the peak of the Archean realm. What is this thing? He thought, on the verge of wailing. Without any hesitation, he drew upon his 5 remaining shots of Archean luminescence and sent them all toward the huge hand. Booms rang out as the Archean luminescence slammed into the hand, causing it to lurch to a halt. Then, Bai Xiaochun took advantage of the shockwaves from the impact to put more distance between himself and the hand. At the same time, Bai Xiaoqi sent the fan shooting toward Bai Xiaochun. Within moments, Bai Xiaochun was back on the fan. As his foot touched down, the huge hand recovered, and began to move in the direction of the fan in even more menacing fashion than before. Shrieking, Bai Xiaoqi scrambled to try to hide inside of the fan itself. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun, his face ashen from fear, let out a shout as he took control of the fan and sent it hurtling, not away from the hand, but toward it. A massive boom could be heard as the two collided. The huge hand was immediately shoved backward, and the fan was sent spinning off in the opposite direction. If that had been all there was to it, Bai Xiaochun might have just commanded the fan to flee. But that was when a second withered hand suddenly materialized and shot toward the fan. Time to put everything on the line, he shouted. There was no time for fear or hesitation. He knew that if he didn't go absolutely all out, then the danger would only grow more critical. Dazzling light cascaded off of the fan as the arm of the sovereign once again shot out from the fan face. Bai Xiaochun and Bai Xiaoqi were yet again cooperating to defend the fan. Even the Archean slave appeared, using the power of the sovereign's arm to emerge from the fan and shoot toward the menacing enemy. The surrounding void trembled as the sovereign's arm flew out. Meanwhile, the withered hand suddenly stopped moving, seemingly shocked to see something of this level. Unfortunately for the hand, there was no time for it to retreat before the sovereign's arm hit it. A boom could be heard as, for the first time, the withered hand was damaged and began to crumble. However, the sovereign's arm was also hurt, and the Archean slave was coughing up blood. Both of them spun and returned to the fan face. All of this takes a bit of time to describe, but happened in the shortest of moments. Trembling, Bai Xiaochun immediately commanded the fan to flee. "Damn it," Bai Xiaoqi shrieked. "This is all your fault. I told you we should have left, but you got greedy." Unfortunately, the moment of danger had not yet passed. Even as Bai Xiaoqi and Bai Xiaochun fled on the fan, a roar of rage echoed out from the well. Next, to the complete disbelief of Bai Xiaochun, the well began to grow in size, twisting and distorting as it became a huge lamp. The well was actually just the top portion of the lamp. As the lamp appeared in full, fluctuations rolled out into the void as something vastly larger than the lamp appeared. It was an enormous, old woman, made completely from paper. She wore burial clothes, also made from paper, and had a ferocious glint in her eyes. "You can't escape," she howled in a voice that sounded like countless people speaking at once. Then, she began to walk through the void toward the fan, and Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was so scared that his eyes bulged, and he felt like weeping. "Heavens," he blurted, "I was just collecting some souls. How did I end up provoking a freak like this?" Bai Xiaoqi was shrieking just as loudly, urging Bai Xiaochun to flee as quickly as possible. "She's not a sovereign, but she might as well be." Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding, and he was seriously considering retreating to the eternal immortal domains. He had actually attempted to do so back in the world of the paper people, but had failed. Now that he was on the fan itself, he was fairly certain that it would work. However, he couldn't simply leave Song Ke and Bai Xiaoqi in such danger. Furthermore, it would also cut off the path he had been treading, which he wasn't willing to do. Gritting his teeth, he decided that he wouldn't give up unless there was absolutely no other alternative. Thankfully, the treasured fan was capable of incredible speed, and although the old woman was putting up a good chase, she couldn't actually catch up. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was completely focused on maintaining top speed, aware that if he slipped up, she would catch up to them and slaughter them. Scowling on the verge of tears, he kept the fan moving forward. Half a month passed by in a flash, during which time the old woman chased them relentlessly. The chase continued for 3 years. During that time, Bai Xiaoqi complained and grumbled constantly. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun mostly got used to the situation. Although he wasn't particularly terrified, he was starting to get very exhausted, to the point where his hair was disheveled, and he had dark circles under his deeply bloodshot eyes. After 3 years, the old woman seemed to be slowing down in her pursuit. Enlivened, Bai Xiaochun gobbled down some medicinal pills and then accelerated. A few months later, he couldn't even see the old woman behind them. "So stingy. I just took a few souls, and she chased me for 3 years because of it?" The mere thought of those 3 bitter years filled him with depression. Despite having successfully shaken the old woman, Bai Xiaochun still didn't feel completely at ease. Gritting his teeth, he sent the fan flying along for another few months. At that point, he glanced over at the dispirited Bai Xiaoqi, and rubbed his nose awkwardly. Hey little Bai, why don't you go rest up a bit? It's been a long 3 years." Bai Xiaoqi cast him an angry glare, and thought about giving him a piece of his mind. But at the moment, he was just too exhausted, and simply faded from view. Upon seeing that the spirit automaton had gone to sleep, Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief. After all, he knew that he was in the wrong. If he hadn't gotten greedy, then they wouldn't have had to deal with the 3-year chase. And yet, the gains he had made 3 years before caused his eyes to light up when he thought about them. Looking down, he thought about the vast number of souls that now existed in his bag of holding. "I struck it rich this time. Now I have plenty of ingredients for multicolored flame." Considering that there was no imminent threat of danger, he set the fan to autopilot and then found a good place to go into seclusion and begin a session of flame conjuring. He had finished his formula for 25 colored flame 3 years ago, but had run out of souls to perform tests. Now that his stock was replenished, there was nothing holding him back. A failure wouldn't be a big deal, nor would 2. Even 10 wouldn't cause him to pause for breath. This time, it didn't take long at all to perform the experiments and solve all of the problems with the formula. At that point, he actually conjured a full 25-colored flame. A wide smile broke out onto his face, especially considering the fact that he still had a lot of souls left. With that, he went about working on 26-colored flame and at the same time, advancing his cultivation. As he flew along in the void, 3 more years passed. During that time, he completed his initial formula and also refined his cultivation base significantly. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun woke up and took control of the fan, pushing it forward with greater speed than before. Around the time that Bai Xiaochun was about to make his first attempt to conjure a 26-colored flame, the fan suddenly vibrated. Even as Bai Xiaochun and Bai Xiaoqi looked around in shock, a familiar voice filled their ears in the form of an angered howl. "You can't escape." Eyes widening, Bai Xiaochun shrieked, "It's that old ghost woman." Sending his divine sense out, he caught sight of the same old paper woman, with the lamp in her hand. Bai Xiaochun felt like he was about to go crazy, and Bai Xiaoqi gasped in shock, shaken by the old ghost woman's obsessive determination. As she closed in, Bai Xiaochun's eyes turned bloodshot, and he and Bai Xiaoqi powered up the fan, sending it speeding off into the distance. Not willing to be so easily cowed, Bai Xiaochun took the half-formed 26-colored flame he held in his hand and threw out behind him, hoping to burn the paper woman into ash. However, she simply swallowed the flame. Scalp tingling with fear, Bai Xiaochun didn't dare to make any further tests such as that. Thus, the fan sped off into the distance, and another long chase began through the void. Bai Xiaochun scowled, not wanting to just spend his time fleeing, but having no other choice. Obviously, he couldn't fight the old ghost woman. That much he had learned during the previous chase. Nothing he launched back at her did any good. This chase lasted for another 3 years. At that point, the paper woman finally started to slow down, and the distance between them grew. By this time, Bai Xiaochun had grown completely used to her howling and roaring. The most depressing thing about the entire situation was that Bai Xiaochun had to focus all of his energy on powering and directing the fan, making it impossible to work on his flame conjuring. The upside was that because he constantly drew upon the power of his cultivation base, his cultivation actually advanced steadily the entire time. Bai Xiaochun eventually realized that the old ghost woman seemed completely obsessed with catching him, and would likely find him again even if he shook her. And thus, he sent the fan in a very different direction, hoping to buy some time. Eventually, he was once again able to immerse himself in flame conjuring. And thus, years passed. It didn't really matter how fast he fled, or where he lost the old ghost woman. At the most, she would find him again in 3 years. He was used to the situation, and yet, had to go all out in his attempts to flee whenever she caught up. Each time, she seemed to move faster than the previous time, leaving Bai Xiaochun scowling on the verge of tears, and at the same time, madly focused on cultivation whenever he could. Thanks to the pressure, his cultivation base advanced constantly, pushing him very close to the great circle of the celestial realm. Whenever the old ghost woman wasn't around, he would work on flame conjuring. As time flew by, he eventually reached the point where he could conjure 26-colored flame. With every flame that he put into the mark on the back of his hand, Bai Hao's aura grew stronger, and the fluctuations clearer. Unfortunately, he got stuck working on the formula for 27-colored flame. Unlike the previous formulas, things did not fall into place, and he eventually reached a bottleneck in which he had absolutely no idea how to proceed. All he could do was spend more time on auguries and analyses. Eventually, 10 years had gone by. Bai Xiaochun stood there on the edge of the fan, hair disheveled as he looked out into the void. Next to him, Bai Xiaoqi assisted him in powering the fan to go as quickly as possible. The howling old paper woman was chasing them, her lamp sending out glowing light that turned anything it touched into paper. How come this old ghost woman is always popping up? We never saw her before. It was a real headache. She always appeared randomly, putting Bai Xiaochun in the passive position. Eventually, she began to slow down, and the distance between them grew. Frowning, he breathed a sigh of relief. Off to the side, Bai Xiaoqi seemed just as angry as ever. "This is all your fault. Why do you have to go and provoking something so terrifying? You always have the option of escaping, but I don't." Bai Xiaoqi was clearly nervous about the paper woman constantly chasing after them. Bai Xiaochun sighed, but wasn't in the mood to comfort Bai Xiaoqi. Even as he pondered how to possibly deal with the old ghost woman, Bai Xiaoqi suddenly said, "Ee." Startled, Bai Xiaochun sent his divine sense out to determine where the old ghost woman had appeared from. But then, his expression flickered. Instead of the woman, he saw something even more strange. The void around them seemed to be sinking. Technically speaking, the void had no directions such as up, down, left, or right. But right now, the area around them clearly seemed to be sinking down, forming something that looked like a huge funnel or a spinning vortex. Perhaps it could have been attributed to some strange natural phenomenon. However, that was when Bai Xiaochun noticed that, at the bottom of the sunken area was another world. His divine sense revealed to him a world filled with countless hourglasses. There were large ones and small ones, filling the entire world, none of them damaged. All of them were operational, and had sand flowing through them. It was a truly bizarre and shocking sight. What is this place? Even as the words left his mouth, Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide, and he chokingly exclaimed, "The essence of time." Heavens! That place has the essence of time in it. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.